May 1st, 1982, late afternoon, 20,000 feet above the freezing South Atlantic just north of West Falkland. First Lieutenant Carlos Perona is climbing his Mirage 3 into the thin, bright air, and he is climbing for a reason. He knows the machine strapped to his back. He knows what it can do. His Mirage can reach more than twice the speed of sound. It can fly higher than 50,000 feet. The British fighter somewhere below him cannot do either of those things. By every number Perona has ever been taught, the fight he is about to enter is one he should win from above. The plan is simple. Stay high. Use the altitude. Look down. Pick the moment. Fire. And leave before the slower enemy can answer. So Perona looks for the British jet beneath him, and he cannot find it beneath him, because it is not beneath him. It is right alongside, a few hundred meters off his wing, matching him turn for turn, both aircraft hauling around the sky under heavy load, both pilots trying to do the exact same thing to each other. The faster plane has not stayed fast. The higher plane has not stayed high. Something has gone wrong with the arithmetic, and Perona has only seconds to understand what. He does not get them. A missile leaves the British fighter. Perona feels the impact, rolls his crippled Mirage and ejects into the cold. He survives. His aircraft does not. The man who fired was Flight Lieutenant Paul Barton, a Royal Air Force pilot flying a Royal Navy Sea Harrier off the deck of a carrier. It was the first time a Sea Harrier had shot down another aircraft. It would be very far from the last, and in the weeks that followed, Argentine pilots and Argentine commanders would keep circling the same uncomfortable question. The question that runs underneath this entire story. They had the faster aircraft. They had the higher aircraft. They had far more aircraft. So how exactly was the slower machine winning? This is the story of how a subsonic jump jet, a plane that could not even break the sound barrier in level flight, fought a force of supersonic fighters across 2.5 months of war and came away with a record that sounds like a misprint. 20 enemy aircraft shot down in air-to-air combat. 0 Sea Harriers lost in air-to-air combat. To understand how that happened, and why the men flying the Mirages could never quite explain it afterward, we have to start with the aircraft themselves, and with a promise made by an engineer in France almost 30 years before the war. In the 1950s, France wanted an interceptor. Not a dogfighter, an interceptor. The threat everyone feared was the high-flying bomber, so the requirement was speed and altitude. Climb fast, get high, reach the bomber and shoot it down. Dassault answered with the Mirage 3, a sleek delta-winged jet that in 1958 became the first Western European aircraft to pass Mach 2 in level flight. It was a genuine triumph. By the time Argentina bought it, the Mirage 3 was one of the most respected fighters in the world. Argentina also flew the Dagger, which was an Israeli-built copy of the Mirage 5, itself a clear weather attack version of the same basic design. Same delta wing, same single engine, same heritage. Fast, simple, and built to fight up high or strike fast and low. Now, the British aircraft. The Sea Harrier was something else entirely. It grew out of the Harrier jump jet, the famous aircraft that could take off vertically and hover using swivelling engine nozzles. The Royal Navy had lost its big aircraft carriers, so it needed a fighter small enough to fly from little ships with a ski ramp on the bow. The Sea Harrier was subsonic. It was slower than the Mirage. It flew lower than the Mirage. On a specification sheet handed to any air force in the world in early 1982, the Mirage wins, and it is not close. A great many defence experts said exactly that out loud. A slow jump jet, they argued, could not survive against real supersonic fighters. They were wrong, and the reasons they were wrong are the heart of this story. There were 3 of them. The first reason was distance. When Argentina seized the Falklands, the islands were held, but the Argentine fighters were not based on them. The runway at the capital, Stanley, was too short and too exposed for fast jets to operate from safely, so the Mirages and the Daggers flew from air bases on the Argentine mainland. Those bases were roughly 400 miles away across open ocean. 400 miles out, a fight, and 400 miles back. The Mirage was never designed to do that. It was built to defend its own airfield, to go up, intercept, and come down. Argentina had almost no aerial refueling tankers, and the Mirage and Dagger fighters could not take fuel in the air anyway. So a pilot would arrive over the islands having already burned most of what he carried, fight for a handful of minutes, and then turned for home praying his fuel lasted. The honest Argentine accounts of this are striking. One pilot described arriving, fighting, and returning, and when asked how much fuel he had left on landing, he made a circle with his finger and thumb. A 0. 5 minutes of combat. That was often the whole budget. The second reason was altitude, and this is what trapped Carlos Perona on the first day. The Mirage was a high-altitude machine. Up high, in thin air, it was magnificent. But the British pilots refused to play that game. They would not climb up to fight on the Mirage's terms, and the Argentine pilots, low on fuel, could not afford to circle and wait to lure them up. So the fights happened lower down, in thicker air, in tight turns. And down low, the heavy delta wing of the Mirage bled away its energy and speed in hard turns far faster than the Sea Harrier did. The plane that was superior at 50,000 feet was simply not superior in a knife fight at low level. Perona himself said it plainly years later. He had wanted to watch the Harrier and fire from above. The shock, he said, was finding the Harrier right beside him, both of them pulling hard, both trying to do the very same thing. The third reason was a missile, and it may have been the most important of all. The United States quietly supplied Britain with its newest air-to-air weapon, the AIM-9 Lima Sidewinder. To understand why that mattered, you have to know how older heat-seeking missiles worked. For decades, a heat-seeker could only chase the hot exhaust of an enemy engine. That meant you had to maneuver into a position behind your target before you could even shoot. The 9 Lima changed the rule. It was an all-aspect missile. It could lock onto an enemy from the front, from the side, from any angle, not just from behind. A British pilot no longer had to win the long-turning fight to reach a firing position. He could point and fire much sooner. The Argentine fighters carried older missiles that still needed the tail chase. The difference was enormous. Of the 20 aircraft the Sea Harriers shot down, the large majority fell to that single new weapon. One of the men who helped build it called it a death ray, and over the Falklands it very nearly was. There is a fourth thing people love to believe about this campaign, and it is mostly a myth, so let us deal with it honestly. The Harrier could swivel its engine nozzles in flight to brake suddenly, a trick nicknamed viffing. The legend says British pilots used it constantly, slamming on the brakes to make Mirages overshoot and then shooting them down. Makes a wonderful story. It is also, by the careful accounts of the pilots and the historians, almost entirely untrue in this war. The engagements were not long, swirling duels where such a trick would matter. They were usually one fast pass or a tail chase against an enemy already running low on fuel. What actually won was not a magic maneuver. It was the missile, the training, and being guided into the right place at the right time by the radar operators on the ships below. Because that is the other half of it. The British pilots were superbly trained, and they were not fighting alone. Warships in the bays and sounds used their radars to direct the Sea Harriers, steering them in behind incoming Argentine raids, so they arrived with the advantage already won. The commanding officer of one of the 2 Sea Harrier squadrons, Commander Nigel Ward, known to everyone as Sharky, had spent years preparing his pilots and pushed them hard on the long voyage south, drilling them in night flying and in using their radar over water. When the fighting came, that preparation showed. If your father or your grandfather served in the Royal Navy, the Fleet Air Arm, or the Royal Air Force, in any conflict, I would genuinely like to read about them in the comments. The ship, the squadron, what they did, what they remembered. Those small personal details are the real record and they deserve to be kept. The pressure on the Argentine pilots is hard to overstate, and it is important to say clearly that they were not cowards and they were not poor airmen. They were brave to the point of recklessness. They flew enormous distances over a hostile sea, they pressed their attacks home through walls of fire, and they sank and damaged British ships at terrible cost to themselves. One Argentine pilot reckoned his chance of getting home from a mission was about 50%, and flew it anyway. Commander Ward himself said afterward that the British had expected a harder fight, and that they found the Argentine pilots a very brave lot who came in again and again, earning real admiration and respect. This was not a story of weak men, it was a story of good men sent to do an almost impossible thing with the wrong tools at the wrong range. The pattern set on the first day held to the last. On June 8th, near Bluff Cove, after Argentine jets had struck British landing ships, Flight Lieutenant David Morgan and his wingman caught a flight of attacking Skyhawks and shot down 3 of them in moments. They were the final air-to-air kills of the war, and once again the slower jump jet had arrived in the right place, at the right height, with the right weapon, and the faster aircraft could not answer. So consider the full balance sheet. Argentina committed well over 100 combat aircraft to the campaign. Britain sent 28 Sea Harriers, reinforced partway through. The British were outnumbered many times over in the air. And yet the air-to-air score came out 20-0. Argentina's advantage in speed, in ceiling, in sheer numbers was real on paper and almost meaningless in practice because it could never be brought to bear. That is the answer to the question Carlos Perona was left with as he hung beneath his parachute on the first afternoon of the war. He had the faster machine and he still lost, and the reason was never really about the machine at all. It was about 400 miles of empty ocean with no way to refuel across it. It was about being forced to fight low when you were built to fight high. It was about a new weapon that did not care which way you were pointing, and it was about a smaller, slower, better prepared force that understood all three of those things and bent every engagement to fit them. For years afterward, the Argentine pilots searched for the one decisive factor that had beaten them, and they never quite found it because there was no single thing to find. There was a situation, and the side that shaped the situation won. The faster aircraft is not the one that wins. The one that wins is the one that gets to fight on its own terms. In those cold skies over the islands in 1982, the slower aircraft did exactly that, and the men in the faster aircraft, brave as they were never allowed to find out how fast they truly were. If this story gave you something to think about, a like helps it reach other people who care about getting the history right, with the names, the numbers, and the hard truths left in. Subscribe if you would like the next one. There are many of these stories, and most of them are about ordinary men in flying suits who looked at the odds, climbed into the sky, and went anyway.